Hey, Neil here. We're going to get started in just a second. Unfortunately, I can't see anything on my phone, so I don't know if we're good to go or not good to go. If somebody could just let me know, that'd be good. I want to make sure that we're um, got to figure out how I can see this. Hey, Neil here. We're going to get started. Whoa. Yeah, I'm not going to be able to watch it on LinkedIn like I usually do to see if we're good to go. So I'm going to watch the chat for a couple of seconds just to make sure that logistics is good. It's just sound and video and me sharing the training. If you're new to here, thanks, guys. If you're new to what we're doing here, it's consistent training. I am going to turn this off because I keep forgetting every day to turn off the little ticker symbol on the bottom. But let's go ahead and get started. I'm Neil McDonnell. I'm the president of the GovCon Chamber of Commerce, and I do these daily LinkedIn Lives every day at noon East Coast time as a way to teach you process and procedures that will lead to success in the federal market. Since 2018, I've been teaching people like you that government contracting is not a secret. It's just a process. And when you follow that process, you'll achieve success. Today, we're going to be talking about the process that happens around a meeting. So there's process activities that happen before the meeting and what you do during the meeting that lead to a successful meeting. That's what I want to drive into. In particular, in here, I'm going to be driving onto control, right? And this idea of how do you get, keep, and regain control if you've lost it. And lost it could be a soft kind of thing, but we're going to talk about it. I'm speaking to this topic because of two reasons. One is somebody brought it up in one of the questions. One of your peers in the community here asked me about, what do you do when the person you're meeting with is asking all these off-ball questions than you thought you would have to answer? It's almost like they're judging you. And the minute I heard it, I was like, oh, I know exactly what I'm going to teach you. Let me go into it, because I experienced that same thing 10 plus years ago when I was running my own company, right? I sold at the end of 17, but I had been running it for a while, and I experienced similar things with large firms. And so I thought it was such a great topic that I'm going to dive into. One thing I want to ask you to do before we get started is put your name or company name and core competency into the chat. I want to remember who you are, and I want buyers to remember who you are. And by putting it in over and over again, by the way, here's a tip. Don't try to get creative. If you're coming back into the community day after day for different training topics, don't get tired of putting the exact same thing in when you're talking about your company name and your core competency. You want us to just see the same thing over and over again. I saw yesterday Hunter put in Bain Group, SharePoint, and my first thought was, oh, it's kind of small. And then I went, wait a minute. Company name, Bain Group, what their core competency is SharePoint, right? She might have expanded a little bit to say Office 365, but it was so simple. She can engage in the chat later, right? But that one thing makes it really easy to see. And so once you find a good hook like that, because that's really what it is a hook. Once you find that, keep using it, both here in the chat, in this community, but just everywhere. If you go to matchmaking, if you talk to somebody, what do you guys do? We do this. Okay. I'm going to move on. I got a lot to try to go through, and I talk in a fire hose way. I am not able really to see the chat. I kind of look over there, but I do a pretty good job ignoring it to make sure I'm on topic, and then I'll come back afterwards. But one of the things I wanted to pay attention to, is I talked about this a little bit already, is what you might be experiencing if this training that I'm doing today fits for you. And really, it's if you go into meetings that they're not going the way you want them to go, or you're feeling small. And I'll talk about that in a minute. Small is one word to describe many different words. But when you go into a meeting, you could be expecting this. But instead, what happens is this or this, right? And if you don't look at this, and this, apparently this is my favorite word today. If you don't look at what you're running into in a meeting and begin to develop the skills to bring the variation of the meeting into the area that you want, then you're going to constantly have meetings that just aren't hitting your expectation. They're not going to be what I consider successful. And when I say feeling small, I mean going in there and feeling like you got your hat out. That's an old thing about take your hat out. You're basically collecting money, or you're feeling like a freshman in a high school kind of thing, where You got all these seniors around, and that's not the way it should be, because we're all peers, largest, smalls, government. We're all peers in this world of accomplishing the federal government's mission. And so we are in different organizations, but I've got 30 years of experience. If I start a brand new company and I've got 3 of us in there, does that make me less than Lockheed or some employee at Lockheed because I'm in a 3-person company? No, of course not. I've got as much experience as them. They just got way more resources. And so helping you begin to get past this situation of feeling maybe less than equal in a meeting is something that I want you to get out of today's training. When you do what I'm going to recommend, you will absolutely start having more successful meetings. And I describe successful as something that moves the sale forward. If you're in a space right now and you're listening and you happen to not be doing sales, then it's just moving the objective closer to being accomplished or completed when you have a successful meeting. A great meeting is when we all think it's awesome. We say, hey, we should get together again, and then we don't. It's similar to families and cousins at a wedding or something. We should get in touch more often. Yeah, we should. And then you don't see them until the next wedding. Okay, so let's talk about 4 things I want to drive through pretty fast today. First thing is, I just want to introduce the whole concept of control. What do I mean by control when I'm talking about it? The second thing I want to talk to you about is, how do you get control? Third thing is, how do you keep it once you got it? And the fourth thing is, how do you regain it? So we're going to really talk about just a quick intro to control, and then get, keep, and regain it so that we move forward. So when I talk about control, I don't mean it in any kind of bad way. I used this example yesterday or the day before in a video where I said, if you get into a car with a few friends, one person is in control. We're okay with them being in control. They're the driver. They're controlling the speed, whether we stop before we hit something, turning left and right, et cetera. They're in control of everything. The rest of us might have input into it. We might even do backseat driving, but we're not in control. They are. And so when they're in control of us and our destiny in a car, it doesn't make them better than us. And it doesn't mean that they're trying to subordinate us or any way be disrespectful to us in the car. Well, it's the same thing in a meeting. If you go into a meeting and you've got the agenda and you're driving that meeting towards the objective and the purpose of the meeting, well, that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. People who are in that meeting will appreciate the good use of their time, the fact that you actually got done, you being all of you in the meeting, got done what you hoped to get it done in that meeting. And then you got out of the meeting a clear set of notes and action items, et cetera. And so I want to use an example from when I used to do sales in the business to consumer level. Vacuum cleaners, knocking on doors, going around in the San Francisco area selling vacuum cleaners door to door. One of the ways that I would take control as a salesperson, when I'm in there, I would demonstrate the vacuum cleaners, functionality, vacuum up dirt, that kind of thing, right? And but then when that demo was done and they're all sufficiently impressed, the customer is sufficiently impressed, and now I'm trying to close the deal because vacuum cleaners are a single transaction generally sale. We would go to the kitchen table. That's the typical place back in the day. Go to the kitchen table and sit down, and I would explain the process to this potential customer of what would happen next if they chose to move forward. If you chose to move forward, then we would fill out this form, and I have the form right in front of me. We would fill out this form. At the top, it's got your name, your first name, your last name, and your address information, right? That's very important. I'm explaining that to them. Some other basic details. The different vacuum cleaners you might choose, which model, whether you want an upright or a canister. And then in the pricing side, whether you want to use a credit card or financing that we offer. So that's the process. And then when that's done, I have a brand new vacuum cleaner that I can bring in fresh out of the box. I will open up. I will get it all ready for you so that's good to go. I've explained the process to them, right? It takes a little longer when I do it. But then I would sit there and say, is Gus spelt with a G or a J or whatever, right? That's a bad example, but like Gus Phelps, is Phelps spelled with an F or a PH, right? And they would say, oh, it's G-U-S-P, and I'd start writing it down. And the reason is, the minute I start writing it down, they're on the journey with me. I'm attempting to control them on the journey. Now, just so we're clear, in vacuum cleaner sales, half the people are like, yeah, thanks, no, right? Even when you explain the process, it's not like everybody is somehow magically wooed into just buying. But control is about somebody saying, here's the agenda. In a professional environment, we have an agenda. And I talk about it from a call plan. I'll get into this in a minute. But the idea is when you have an agenda and you let people know about it and start talking to it, now you're in control and you're guiding everybody down this path. So one other thing about getting control, right, is making sure you're getting enough data and evidence gathered that will support anything you want to talk about in a meeting. And so a big part of control, and I didn't put this into any of the other tips down below, but it's about research. You have got to do your homework, especially in the federal side. In the agency side, they tell us, do your homework before you come to us. If you properly do your homework, you will have enough data and evidence to keep the meeting going where you want it to go. When there's not enough data and evidence, when it's obvious you haven't done your research, then what happens is the control that would have naturally been around that meeting from your efforts, there's no control. You didn't try to control it by doing your homework or knowing stuff or communicating how knowledgeable you are and how excited you are to be there, that you took the time to know about it. If there's no control, then the meeting can start floating out of the perceived barrier of control. And that's what goes crazy. Last thing I want to talk about from an intro standpoint is really think about bringing a buddy. In sales, I always say 2-on-1. 2-on-1. This idea that you bring two of you to a meeting, it doesn't matter how many people the other one has, but it really, the most important thing is that one of you is talking and one of you is listening, right? At any given point. So you have this ability to communicate back and forth and keep moving the meetings forward. The other huge value of two people at a meeting and bringing a buddy is you can do after action reviews of how did we perform? So even if you have a meeting today and it doesn't go where you want, you and your meeting buddy can look at that and go, why? What happened? Were we not in control? Did we lose control? Did we never able to regain it once we lost it? When you do that with another person, you're able to learn over and over again. It's harder to learn it yourself because you might come out of it feeling just maybe a little brutalized or depressed. But if you come out with a buddy, you're like, let's talk about this. I do this every single day, right? Every day at noon, East Coast, I do a LinkedIn Live. And every day at 12:30, I do an after action review with my team going, how did it go? Like, was I on point? Did I give a tactical suggestion that people could follow, which is our goal, right? We want to make sure that when you're listening, you go, oh, I got that one tip. Kimberly, who might be on here, she talks about how she gets 1, 2, 3 nuggets every single time she comes in. And when she said that, it became our mission that that's what we want to give to you. Well, you should have this same kind of after action review for your meetings. And so by getting an accountability buddy or a meeting buddy, you'll be able to do that. Okay, so let's talk about a couple of tips on how to get control of a meeting. Getting control of a meeting happens before the meeting. One of the first things that should happen when you land a meeting, right? You're going to do whatever it takes to land a meeting, an email, a phone call, et cetera, and you're going to do a calendar invite. You want to be the person who's sending that calendar invite. First step in a control. If you can be that person, always be that person. And all you have to do is volunteer. Hey, why don't you let me know what time's good for you and I will send an invite over. Oh, sounds good. Thanks. In that invite, you have two options to be able to begin to establish control by just communicating with the other person what the meeting should be like. One is the title. And so inside the subject line or title of the calendar event, you can put something pretty clear like intro to Neil's company and an overview of NASA or something, right? Some title like that. And then inside you have a purpose. The purpose is to briefly introduce Neil's company and to spend a good amount of time talking about NASA's data analytic needs or something. And so I've got it in there. I don't even really have to go too far yet. The other thing that you can do before a meeting is fill out a call plan. If you haven't heard me talk about a call plan, you can find videos in my replays that talk about a call plan is necessary for preparing a meeting, understanding what's my objective that will lead to success. What is the purpose of the meeting? Purpose is different than the objective. The objective is the outcome. The purpose is what are we trying to do in the meeting? And then the third main thing that's on a call plan is a set of questions. When you sufficiently do your research and homework and you're preparing 10 questions, let's say to go in and talk to somebody on a 30-minute meeting, it doesn't mean you're just going to rattle those questions off like a detective. Those questions will guide your meeting. But by having them, you're now in control of yourself on being able to drive the meeting. And this slides into when you get to the meeting now. So I'm still in this, how do you get control of the meeting? When you get to the meeting, the call plan has an icebreaker. Whether this is a virtual or physical meeting, it's the same thing. It has an icebreaker. I can say, like Kevin Jans is a professional friend of mine who does a great podcast about doing government contracting, right? From a contractor's perspective. And I can sit there and say, hey, Kevin, I just listened to your last podcast and I really liked how you were talking this point to that point. I'm like, oh, yeah, no, I really enjoyed doing that podcast, right? I've got him talking about his podcast and about government contracting, and I can slide right into, well, let me share with you what I think the purpose of the meeting is, Kevin, and see if that works for you. And I might sit there and say, I want to learn more about the FAR, whatever, right? I'm sliding too far into my example here. But I use the icebreaker to slide right into saying, hey, Kevin, I've got a call plan. I want to make sure I use your time wisely. So I've got some questions here to guide me. And what I see is the purpose of today's meeting, right? We could talk about a lot of things, but what I really hope we can talk about is this. And when and then I say, does that sound fine to you? Do you want me to add anything to that? But when I say that, I instantly am getting them to begin to be agreeing to use my call plan, this agenda, to go through the meeting. Some people, many people I run into love the idea. If I sit there and say, I wrote down 7 or 8 questions here. It's like, hot dog, let's do this. I can check them off in my mind as we're talking, right? They can check it off in their mind. So they feel good about it. And then the one last thing I would say about getting control is right at the beginning, when they say, yeah, that purpose sounds fine, let's get started. Then what I say is, how about I start with a brief introduction of my company and then, hear a little bit about your organization from your perspective. Then I'd like to dive into these questions. One thing before we get started though, is it okay if we start sliding off track, can I kind of interrupt us and bring us back on track so we stay true to the purpose? Is that okay? This is a sales skill, right? It's not charisma or anything. You have to learn to ask this question or some variation of the question and be comfortable asking it. But all I really said is, hey, Kevin, if you and I get off track talking about golf, can I bring us back? Sure. Your job's to keep us on track, Neil. My job's to be here, kind of thing, right? People want to help. Somewhere in here, I can't remember if I said this, but 2 days ago, I did a video about what to say in a meeting. And I said that people like to feel powerful and in control. We all do, subconsciously or unconsciously. And somebody put it in the chat and tell me what the right way to say that is. But, not consciously, we like to be powerful and in control. And what I said is, in my simplified way of stating this, we like to hold you down or help you up. And if I can't do one, I'm doing the other. And so what I said is in the training a couple of days ago is identify ways that could hold you down and reverse it, almost hold yourself down. So the only thing they can do to feel helpful or powerful or in control is to help you up. And it's the same thing here. If you share your call plan, you're talking about the call plan, et cetera, then they will want to help you because that makes them feel good. It makes me feel good to do these videos and to answer your questions. That's how I feel powerful, let's say, right? It's a soft, lowercase powerful, is when I can help so many more people out there than are my customers. It just makes me feel good. And it's the same thing, most of us, that's our nature, is we want to help. And so let's move into how do you keep control. I talked about how do you get control. Keeping control is here's one tip is I like to let them know that I'm taking notes, and I might wait for a second until they start talking. Remember I said, introduce myself, then introduce them. And then we get to the questions. Well, as they're introducing themselves and kind of wrapping that part up, it's an ideal time for me to then say, hey, just using Kevin for my whole example today. I'm taking notes in the meeting. I want to make sure I capture what you're saying correctly, and any action items coming out of this. I want to make sure I'm jotting it down. Is it okay if I interrupt you, if I need to clarify, what did you just say? Or what did we say that action item was? And they're going to say yes. And in sales, it's not about getting a yes, you can have this $10 million deal. It's about getting, yes, I'll have the meeting. Yes, there's an NDA. Yes, there's a PWF draft or something, PWS. And so there's all these mini yeses lead to a sale. In capture, that's all capture is. There's a whole bunch of mini yeses. In meetings, when I say success, it's a whole bunch of mini successes lead to a big success. And so getting these people to clarify that it's okay for you to interrupt to bring them on track, Then when you feel like you need to regain control, in a minute we'll talk about that, you have the ability to interrupt them. Something else that you want to really keep in mind is how to keep control of a meeting is, let's use the same scenario. I introduced my company, they introduced their agency or their company, and very briefly, like 5 to 10 minutes max. And now we're getting into the dialogue. Any meeting should go to the dialogue, by the way, another training. But in that dialogue, one of the things I want to do is, well, and I say this way, one of the first things I wrote down here that I really wanted to ask you about is, I keep hearing in DoD how data is a strategic asset. And I'm curious how that's filtered down to your agency. Can you share what's the feeling about data and the importance of data in your agency? Okay, it's a wide open question, and it lets them ask or begin to answer it in any way they want. Well, in volleyball, right, there's 3 hits in a volleyball, if you don't know. Basically, it's receiving it or bumping it, right? Somebody hits it over the net, you're the first person, you're basically stopping the ball. And when you pop it up, the next person, their job is to set the ball up. And the last person's to spike it or to hit it over the net, whatever. And so what I want you to understand is that in this scenario, you're basically the setter. Forget about the receiving part. You're basically the setter, and you're trying to set up questions that these people will feel really comfortable answering. They're super knowledgeable about it. You're not trying to ask them some trick question. If I'm talking to a chief data officer, I'm going to ask them about that. If I'm talking to a facility manager, I'm going to say, what are some of the biggest complaints you get related to facility cleanliness or something, if that's my business? And so being able to set up their answers by having well thought out questions will make it easy for you to stay on track in the meeting, stay in control, and also for you to be able to demonstrate that you have done your homework. God, these are some of the not toughest questions I've gotten, but these are some of the most thought-provoking questions. I love it. I'm not going off somewhere else. And that's what you want to do, is keep them from going off to thinking about something else. Okay. If there's any pause as you get that answer to the question you're doing, what I like to do is keep reminding them that, oh, that was perfect. Let me cross that off of my call plan. And I know this seems maybe a little silly if it's your first time, but I love doing this because I'm bringing us together, the other person and me, together on crossing things off of my call plan. No, that was awesome. That was more than I expected to hear about your data strategy. Let me cross that off. That actually leads into my next question, which is related to how is data tied to cybersecurity? I keep hearing everything about zero trust. Are you guys thinking about cybersecurity as it relates to data? Where does that fit in? Can you share some information about that? Well, because you're doing that, not only are they going to answer the question you want, which keeps you in control, the meeting's going where you want, but also they're constantly being reminded, oh, we're sticking to an agenda. We're sticking to an agenda. The last tip on keeping control is don't use a big PowerPoint deck. When you go in to meet with anybody, please don't go in there and think you're going to brief. That's old school. None of us have the attention to even look at decks. And one of the worst things is if you give people a read ahead, then they are so rude, in my mind, that they flip ahead everywhere. I'm like, well, shoot, that person just took the time to prepare that deck to brief you. They could have just given it to you. If you're going to do a big deck like that, then you might as well give it to them as a read ahead. Let them read it ahead. So when they come in, they're not looking at it. They're listening to you. What I like to recommend, and I've got a deck, if you'd like me to give you a handout, it's not a bbig pretty thing. It's a framework of a briefing deck of just enough slides to get the conversation to the point where now you're talking about meat of what you want to get across with the company or with the agency. So if you want that, put it in the chat, just saying briefing deck handout, and I'll get that to you afterwards. So let's move into the last one, which is regaining control if you happen to lose it. I've already talked about this before, about interrupting, not in a bad way, right? It's like, hey, John, do you mind if we bring it back to the agenda, things like that. So the thing you have to keep in mind is you have to be okay with interrupting. Interrupting is not a bad thing, in particular, if you got permission from the very person ahead of time, right? I don't want to equate what we do for a living with my kids, but if I look to my kids and I say, hey, don't interrupt. And if you're going to interrupt, say, excuse me, and wait. But if I say to them, look, or if they say to me, hey, I'm going to be running around, but if I need a drink, can I just interrupt you and you get it for me? Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. I'm going to keep talking to your mom and blah. And so now we've agreed to some sort of interruption. So when they interrupt and say, can I get a drink really quick? It doesn't bother me. I'm already kind of prepared to give them a drink. And so they're controlling wait a minute, they're controlling me. No. So they're controlling the dialogue, right? Okay, so there's sometimes you might get a bad question. When I get a question that I don't want to answer, or it's just taking me too far off, whatever it is, briefly answer it, and then pivot back to the purpose of the meeting with a promise to follow up more. So one of the worst questions I can think I might get asked as a small business, hey, you larges, remember this, is how many employees do you have? I'm like, who cares? There's one of me and I'm the best, right? So if they ask, what I sit there and say is, what I might say, right? It depends on the situation, but what I might say is something like this. It's like, oh, I'm just actually frankly amazed. We're certainly not as big as you, right? We are definitely a tiny, small business, but we bring a lot of expertise around the core competency. In fact, Bob, if this works for you, I'd like to bring the conversation back to the purpose so I can keep learning as I go back. And then maybe I can follow up with you later and bring corporate stats, et cetera. One of the other things I do is I try to head off questions like that the second meeting I ever have with somebody, because I go, oh, they might ask. And I just go in and say, look, we're very small. We have incredible experience with this subject matter. We're experts. And we also, the two of us who are in the company, have spent 20, 30 years in large companies, and now we're starting our own. They're going to relate. What you don't want is to get hit with it and feel bad about getting asked the question. How big are you? What kind of line of credit do you have? I'm like, stop asking me these questions. It's our first date. Let's just talk about data. So there's a line that I learned in a movie called The Candidate with Robert Redford, who said he had never been a politician. He was just some guy doing a regular job like all of us, and he decided to run for Senate. And when he was getting mentored by his campaign team, they said, never accept the premise of a question. So if somebody asks you a question and you don't like it, just don't accept the premise. Shift it to what you want. So an example here is somebody might say, like, I want to talk about education, but they ask me, hey, how do you feel about guns in schools? It's pretty dangerous. I go, no, it is dangerous. I mean, schools are a place where learning should happen. I think that children are our future, and it's really important for them to get the education they need. I've switched away from guns in the school, which is a very hot topic, perhaps, and moved into education, which is also a hot topic. It's just not as urgent as guns, but I really want to talk about, we need to increase the funding, right? I'm just making this stuff up from the movie, but we need to increase the funding to the schools so children can have the education they need. They're our future, blah, 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 right? And you can do the same thing in a business world. If they ask you a question, you can briefly answer it and then pivot. That's a skill set in sales. You want to learn that skill and develop that skill. So I'll keep trying to do more of the training that are out there on there. One last tip about how to regain control that'll help you is be prepared with an hour or so of, oh, you're so great. And what I mean is, if I'm meeting with Kevin, I want to know 4 or 5 or 6 of his podcast episodes as an example, and what makes his company so great, so that if I feel like the meeting might be going a little sideways, I can just pause for a second with a related moment about him, almost flattery, right? And then, hey, let's bring it back, Kevin, to the purpose. Okay, let's get back there. Sometimes we go off track and we didn't mean to. So if I have a pretty good amount of references to what the other person has done or what their company is doing, I'm able to slide it there for a second, get control of the talking, and then bring both of us back to the meeting purpose. So fire hose of training we got today. Today we talked about getting, keeping, and regaining control of a meeting so that it can be successful, not just for you, but for the person you're meeting with as well. Win-win. Tomorrow's training, by the way, is kind of an extension of this. It's about handling objections and resistance. And so go ahead and sign up for that. So that way, not only you're going to be there and you put it on your calendar, but you let others know about the event as well. I want to thank you for joining me today. Remember, government contracting, it is not a secret. It's just a process. I'll see you in the next one.